Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time.
Hello there, and welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Edens, and today we have a very special guest. The topic for the conversation is finances and mental health. And so our guest today, we are joined by Justin Good. Say hello, Justin.
Hey, everybody.
So I'll do a brief introduction for Justin, give you some reasons why you should be listening to this guy on the topic of financial literacy and whatnot. And before we dive into it, just so you know, everything that we say in this podcast is not financial advice. We are not financial professionals. And so, we are just two guys having a conversation about mental health and finances. So a little bit of background on Justin. He is a former U.S. naval officer with work experience in a vast array of fields, including finance, marketing, nuclear engineering, aviation, communications, and cyber systems. He has a bachelor's degree in business finance from the University of Kansas and a master's degree in cyber systems and operations from the Naval Postgraduate School. Justin has been investing for over 20 years, and his experience includes real estate, stocks, options, commodities, business startups, cryptocurrency, and other alternative assets. At the age of 39, Justin was able to achieve personal financial freedom and now devotes his time to helping others do the same. Currently, he serves on the board of directors and advisory panel for 3 nonprofit organizations, while also pursuing his goal of helping 1,000 people achieve financial freedom. So before we get started, Justin, I'm just curious, are you keeping track of that 1,000 people?
Great question. Thanks for that wonderful intro.
Absolutely.
Not really. I could go back and find out, but I don't have a running tally in my head right now.
Gotcha. Well, I was just curious, but it is that's a very admirable goal. So let's take a step back with kind of where. I want to find out a little bit more about you. So let's talk about your money journey, so to speak, and how you came to, eventually be the guy that was able to retire at 39. But I'm assuming a lot of that started fairly early on in many of the decisions that you made. So can you tell me a little bit about your early money story, if you will?
Absolutely. So I was the kid that was setting up a lemonade stand on the side of the road, trying to make some money, or I had paper routes, or back before the internet, I was going around doing door-to-door sales out of a catalog, right? So I always had that mentality that I was willing to work for money. Once I got in my early 20s, I realized that it takes a lot more than just hard work to actually financially successful. And I didn't know what I didn't know, if that makes sense. I was able to connect with some very successful people that asked the right questions and gave me some information. And basically what they said, hey, read this book. I was like, all right, I'll read a book.
Was it Rich Dad, Dad?
Oh, you know it was. you know it was. And so...
Just at what age were you when you read that book?
I was 21.
Okay.
Yeah, so 20 to 21 when I read that book, and it changed my perspective about the way I viewed money. And so I learned a lot more about how money worked. And honestly, it lit a fire in me to learn more, because it let me know that there was so much out there that I didn't know, but I needed to know if I wanted to achieve the things I wanted to achieve in my life, which was financial freedom.
Cool. So what was the next, we'll get into kind of your philosophy of money and sort of the breakdown, but, what was the next steps that you took to sort of initiate that process of getting to that ultimate goal of financial freedom?
Years and years of mistakes. Very, very costly. Some, I paid for a lot of education. Some was formal education. Some was the cost of making big mistakes and losing a lot of money. But I was persistent, and I did something. It worked or it didn't work. I tried to learn from it. I tried to surround myself with mentors and people that were successful doing what it was that I wanted to do. And I've been fortunate throughout that journey to make enough mistakes and not stop making the mistakes that eventually I was successful.
So, underlying that, in the sense of you making a lot of mistakes, but continuing down the pathway, a lot of people, they say, invest in a particular asset class that ends up tanking, right, and doesn't really pan out. And then so they sort of say, oh, this whole investing thing isn't quite for me. What was the mindset, the perspective, the philosophy that kind of kept you going all those years, even when you were making all these big mistakes?
Yeah, really, it was, I was very fortunate to have mentors that had achieved the things that I wanted to achieve. So when I tried things and failed, my mentality wasn't, oh, this doesn't work. My mentality was, well, they did it. So I know I can do it. So I did something wrong. I have to figure out what I did wrong so that I can be successful later. And honestly, one of the things I learned from Robert Kiyosaki in Rich Dad, Poor Dad and some of his follow-on books is that mistakes are okay, but you want to try to keep them small in the beginning.
Sure.
Now, I wasn't able to do that. But now when I'm working with people, that's one of the key things that I try to emphasize is I don't want you to be paralyzed and not take any action, but I want you to take small action. Because if it does go wrong, if you do make a mistake, you can learn from it and you can move on and you can continue your journey towards financial freedom.
So let's define some terms. Just can you give me a simple sort of definition of what you mean by financial independence or financial freedom? Absolutely.
So Robert does a great job of defining this. He says when your monthly income from passive assets, which an asset is something that just puts cash into your pocket. So when you have these assets that put money into your pocket every month, when that amount of money that comes in is greater than your expenses, then you've achieved financial freedom. So most people work and earn money. So they're trading their time for money. Then they take that money and they spend it on stuff. And then at the end of the month, they have very little of that money left over. So they have to go back to work, earn more money, use the money to spend on stuff. And that's a very typical cycle that everyone starts out in or everyone is in at some point in their life. What Robert teaches is to do things that generate passive income so that your passive income can be higher than your living expenses. And that is the definition of financial freedom.
So you mentioned, there were a lot of mistakes, particularly in the early years. So it sounds like it was a little bit of a roller coaster ride, right? And in tying this conversation in a little bit with mental health, I want to hear kind of your perspective on some of the mental health stuff that maybe you experienced or you saw other people that have kind of pursued the same trajectory, or over the years as you've coached, many clients that have been looking to gain some additional financial stability. What are some ways in which you think that finances and mental health can be, associated or correlated?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there can be a lot of fear associated with personal finance or investing or like not knowing what to do. So a lot of that uncertainty can lend to fear and can cause a lot of stress. I think in the case where I did make mistakes, I knew that I did something wrong, but I didn't think that I was a failure because the endeavor that I undertook didn't work. Now, don't get me wrong. I haven't always had this attitude and this mentality, right? This has been something that I've grown in and learned along the way. And I've definitely been super sad and angry when things didn't work out, but I've grown and learned over the decades. But if something didn't work, I didn't look at myself and say, I'm a failure. I suck. I shouldn't do this. I looked at it and said, okay, this thing failed. What did I do wrong? Right. So it was the idea of, okay, I made a mistake. Now I can grow. Now I can get better. So it was that mentality of looking to be better and to improve myself, not identifying as the failure itself.
Yeah, that distinction that you're making is a significant problem with those that deal with depression, right? Particularly major depressive disorder, and the level of severity of symptoms a lot of times is strongly correlated with the way in which they identify themselves as being the failure, right? They can't so much of the time it's hard to kind of distance yourself from the way that you feel, or maybe the sort of change in general kind of functionality that you have as a result of your depression. And so there's these really strong, intrusive, negative thoughts about I'm the problem, right? And I'm the weight, I'm sort of the burden, I'm the anchor for people around me. And so there's this really severe level of shame and guilt kind of associated with that, right? And so we've kind of, you talked about how the mistakes that were made, had caused you a lot of stress. You've seen that with a lot of your clients. I do want to make the other comment of, the opposite can also be true, in that, financial issues don't necessarily just cause mental health problems, but mental health problems can also cause a lot of financial issues, right? And so any comments that, you have on that in particular?
I mean, you're more the expert than I am in that realm, so I don't want to overstep my bounds. But yeah, I have worked with people that have ended up in financial situations that were not caused by laziness, or were not caused by their not wanting to try to do something, but actually some sort of like a depression or mental health issue that kind of just, I don't want to say paralyzed, but almost like paralyzed, kept them from moving forward toward their goal.
Yeah. A lot of people that deal with mental health issues, they see the future as being unclear and, to a certain extent, hopeless. And so what's the point in saving for money for a future that you can't even really visualize, right? So that can be a real challenge, especially if your partner tends to deal with depression, in helping them to be motivated to not just look at the here and now, but look at the long-term goal, right? Or, anxiety is a very common thing that's associated with financial insecurity as well. And there's so much correlation there. You think of all the people that are daily sort of checking the stock market and looking at their numbers, right, and watching the values go up and down, and so their emotions are kind of based moment by moment on how their portfolio is doing, right, and so we'll get into a little bit more about the type of good sort of financial habits that we can instill. But there's a couple other things that I did want you to briefly touch on. But can you talk to me a little bit about debt and sort of your philosophy on debt, and how you see debt as both playing a role in the process of building wealth, as well as some of the downsides of debt specifically as it relates to mental health?
Yeah, that's a great distinction that you made there, and I'm glad you did that. So a lot of people view debt as being bad, and in all honesty, having a lot of debt can be very stressful and can cause a lot of other mental health issues. But debt it can be a tool if it's used the right way. So I don't want to say that all debt is bad, but I don't want to say that all debt is good either, right? So things like credit card debt and things like that, they're just very high interest rates on things that you purchase, consumer goods, or things that aren't really doing anything for your long-term future. Probably not good debt.
And I'll actually state the controversial opinion that a lot of home debt and college debt is also probably not a good investment either, right? There are definitely ways in which you can acquire quote unquote good debt that ends up being sort of extraneous, right? More than what you really should have taken on.
Oh, absolutely. Like home debt can be a good long-term decision, but if you try to have like the biggest, best, fanciest house in the neighborhood that you can't afford, then that turns that same sort of living expense debt that could be decent for your long-term plan into something horrible that's only going to cause stress and financial pain in the future.
And real estate debt and prices specifically, over the course of the last year, that has been a conversation that I've had with so many of my patients. They end up getting in a home that they've seen either slow down or decline somewhat in value, and they've taken on, they bought more than really what they could reasonably afford. And so now, where they used to see that they had some savings left, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They're having to figure out an exit strategy during this. And, that leads to a lot of emotional distress. A lot of people are laying up late at night, right? Being unable to sleep, feeling, developing even, panic attacks and whatnot because of these types of issues that are putting themselves and their families sort of at risk, right? So having a good education and not necessarily being able to predict the future, nobody can per se, right? But living sort of within the means and making sort of wise and discernible decisions about even these other expenses that would otherwise be considered to be quote unquote good types of debt. Any other really bad types of debt that should definitely be avoided aside from credit card debt that you just want to briefly touch on?
Oh, I mean, credit card debt, absolutely. Auto loan debt is necessary, but can also be excessive. So it's the same kind of balance of the house. Like if you need a vehicle to get to work, awesome. Get a dependable, reliable vehicle. Try to get low interest rate debt on it if you can, but like you don't need a new Escalade.
Yeah.
Right. So like and I went down that trap. I'm speaking from experience. I bought a brand new BMW sports car at the age of 21 because I saved up money. I was good. And I had a crazy payment and I was absolutely foolish, but I paid the price for a couple of years. And I finally came to my senses. Like, what am I doing? I got to get rid of this thing. So I took a loss. I got rid of it and I tried to move forward in a smarter way. So I've definitely made a lot of the mistakes that I hear day in, day out, people come to me with.
So I want to touch on just a couple other things to consider as it relates to finances and mental health. But having poor finances or financial struggles, this can also lead to social isolation. Many people are too embarrassed to socialize or participate in activities that they cannot afford, right? And so when you're really strapped financially, that really limits your ability to say, go out to a restaurant with friends or go to, other maybe sporting events or other things that you would otherwise enjoy. And so that can really limit your ability or desire even to participate, as kind of a general sort of member of society in your social circle, right? So that's one aspect. Another is just this sort of general feeling of loss of control. Many people find that as they have lost control in in this aspect of their lives, it makes them feel as if they're losing control in other aspects as well, right? It's a lot of that is that self-talk. It's, I'm a failure in this, and so therefore I'm a failure in a lot of other aspects. And then for some people, there can also be, a couple other concepts just that we'll briefly mention are the idea of like financial trauma, as well as the idea of like financial infidelity. And so, things such as evictions, foreclosures, bankruptcies, like these can actually be, traumatic experiences for people. And so, as much as we can, if we make the decisions up front, we can have a much higher likelihood of avoiding those risks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things that I've learned from a very smart mentor is that you cannot eliminate risk. Like risk is something that we have to deal with in all areas of life, but especially like investing in personal finances. But the more education you have, the more you're able to minimize that risk. So you can't eliminate it, but you can definitely minimize it with education. So that's why I'm an advocate for personal financial education.
Absolutely. So let's break down a little bit of your kind of basic and generalized philosophy on some of the some of the ways that we can create a kind of solid foundation of financial literacy that we can kind of refine on an individualized basis, in the future for people that are more interested in this particular topic. So if you could give me some of your foundational kind of principles, if you will, then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the absolute foundation is being able to control the money that you have in your bank, in your account, right? And so the idea is spending less than you earn on a monthly basis. So So that's the absolute foundation. Once you're able to get that under control, then you can take the next step and live off of that lesser amount of your income. And then the what's left over, you can devote that to specific things like building up a savings account or setting aside for investments or other charitable endeavors. And there's percentages that I kind of start people off with and then let them tweak that according to their needs and their situation, because everybody's coming at this from a different place. Yeah. So that general idea. And then once you kind of have some money starting to be set aside for investing, then that's when the education really comes in. What do I do with this money that's being set aside? So there's all sorts of different asset classes, from real estate and stocks.
Before you actually go there, let me go back on the savings aspect, because I hear a lot of people asking, well, how do I create that difference, right? What are some of the main levers that I can pull in order to decrease my monthly spending without maybe, obviously there's going to be some sacrifice, but most people don't just want to eat rice and beans every single day, right? And live in a shack of a house. So what are some things that, that you see as maybe some broadly applicable things that many people can look into in terms of saving money?
I know everybody doesn't want to eat beans and rice, and I'm not an advocate for doing that. I like food, I like having fun, but in moderation. So if I used to go out to dinner 4 days a week, then I have to say, okay, I'm only going out 2 days a week, right? If I enjoy a subscription to maybe a streaming service, like maybe one of the things is, I'm going to cut off this streaming service, and instead of watching an hour of TV on that service every night, I'm going to read a book like Rich Dad Poor Dad, or some other book that can help me along that journey, right? So these concepts are very simple, but they can be difficult, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So very simple to do, but can be difficult to actually carry out, just because of habits and other things we have going on in our lives.
Yeah, I've heard the majority of household responsibilities from a financial standpoint, like the three biggest levers typically are housing, food, and transportation, right? And so those are the ones that if you can make substantial changes in those, which isn't always possible, right? But if you can make some reasonable changes in one of those key areas, then that can make a significant difference in the overall spread in which you're spending. And then, of course, there's going to be other things like you mentioned, the Netflix subscription, or maybe, a lot of people I know have 4, 5, 6, 7 subscriptions that they're getting every single month, right? That they're not even aware of. And there are services out there now, right, that can track these subscriptions, and then they can cancel them for you automatically, right? So those are definitely should be part of the conversation. And those are, in kind of my mind, those are a little bit of like the icing on the cake, if you will. Right. So any comments that you have specifically on like those big 3 levers of the housing, transportation, and food? I know you sort of briefly mentioned food as it relates to like eating out at restaurants, but any other comments that you have about those?
Yeah, I found that housing is probably one of the harder ones for people to try to change. It just takes longer because there's a lease and they're comfortable where they are and stuff like that. But if you're talking about making a serious change in your future plans for the sake of changing your financial situation, then that's a great place to start. Rental prices and things have been going up, so that's not always easy to find a new place to live. But they could actually save money. But yeah, that's absolutely an avenue that people can look at and try to find some ways to save money. Transportation is also a good one. Like in my case, I had a car that I was paying $700 a month on, a long time ago. And that was absolutely nuts back then. And so I came to my senses. It's like, I can't keep doing this. This doesn't make sense. Yeah. So I bought a car that I was paying $350. So I literally cut my car payment in half because I realized that I didn't need that. Yeah.
So any other tips on like creating a budget?
Yeah. So there's lots of tools out there. I don't have any specific that I use myself or that I promote, but there's all sorts of apps out there, or there's spreadsheets. If somebody likes getting on the spreadsheet and like getting into
Dave Ramsey cash envelope method.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So I'm not a huge Dave Ramsey fan overall, but he has a lot of great points for like very basic level financial education. And so if you can't control your actual spending and you need to use cash and envelopes, then that's the way to start. And then once you get that under control, then maybe you can consider using a card or something like that.
Safe to say that the first step that you're advocating is, if there's not a big difference between your savings rate relative to the expenses, right? Or I should say the amount of income that you have coming in relative to your expenses, then we should try to create a larger spread by trying to reduce our overall on a monthly basis. And then I think the second thing that you said, and so if we want to call this step 2, was if you don't have an emergency fund of sorts, start stocking away some of the money towards that emergency fund. Now, I heard you also say that there's kind of multiple sort of ways that you could go about this, multiple ideas and how much should be in this emergency fund and where it should be placed and whatnot. But could you give us like a general rule of thumb?
Absolutely. So I usually start people off with the idea of living off of 70% of your income. So sometimes that's absolutely not possible, 80%, 90%, but whatever it needs to be in your individual situation. But if you're able to live off of 70% of your income, that leaves 30%. And so I describe it as buckets. So you have a bucket for savings, a bucket for investing, and a bucket for like giving or charity. And so each of those buckets could be, I start off at around 10% for each of those, but those can fluctuate as necessary. So every month, say you have $1,000 that comes in, you live off of $700, and you're able to put $100 in the savings bucket, $100 in the investment bucket, and $100 in the charity bucket. And then you just let that go and let it build up. And then once the savings bucket has accumulated enough money, it could be a different savings account, like a high yield savings account separate from your bank account, or however you want to do it. But once that's built up to a reasonable amount that you're comfortable with, then you can start to shift that extra money every month over into the investment bucket. Now, the way to figure out how much that savings account should be is very, very, I say up to you. It varies widely. So a lot of thumb rules that I've heard can be 2 months of your paycheck, or up to 6 months of your paycheck. But the whole point, and I think the important part of that, is it needs to be something that you are comfortable with, that doesn't cause you stress. So if you sleep like a baby at night and don't worry about finances at all, if you have 1 month's paycheck, cool. If you need 6 months in a bank so you sleep well and you don't have to worry about a layoff, or you don't have to worry about expenses popping up out of nowhere from like kids or something like that, then go for 6 months. But that's very much up to you and your individual situation.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad you brought up a couple of those points, because a lot of that range may depend on a number of factors, like you were kind of mentioning. If you have significant health issues, right, and you have maybe large medical bills that are coming up, or maybe the roof on your house is going to need to be replaced at some point, or maybe. So I guess I could say, if you're owner versus a tenant yourself and you're renting, right, there's going to be a lot potentially larger expenses that could theoretically come up in sort of a sudden fashion. Or maybe you work in sales or in a job in which the industry isn't particularly secure, right? And you get these wild fluctuations in your salary, or, given the economy that we currently live in, there's a high likelihood of you getting let go. Then, you might want to err more so on the side of having a few more months, right, in the emergency savings. So once we've kind of gotten that emergency savings up to a place in which we're pretty comfortable, sounds like the next step that you said was you start allocating that money that you would have otherwise put in the emergency savings over into the investment bucket. So can you talk a few minutes about, some of your kind of general investing philosophies? What are some good asset classes to, put that money in, and how does, maybe some general guidelines on or I should say general things that you might consider on where you would consider putting that money once it's built up to a certain amount.
Absolutely. I'd love to. So again, not financial advice, but my investment philosophy, I look at, so there's two types of investing. So you can either invest for capital gains, which is the typical way of buying something low and then selling it when it's high, right? And then you make the money. So you buy it, you sell it, but now you have money. The other way to think about investing is investing for cash flow. So you buy something that generates money, that generates what we call cash flow. And then if the price goes up, that's good. If the price goes down, that's okay also. But when you're investing in that way, you're primarily concerned with what the asset is actually producing. So if it's producing any money every month. So if you're buying, so my investment philosophy is buying things that produce cash flow. And so I don't worry about the price going up or going down for things that I've owned. And that helps to reduce, stress. And that keeps you from having to watch the market and try to day trade. Day trading, yeah, not financial advice, but listen to this. You're not a day trader. Please don't try to be a day trader. There's statistics, 95% of people that try to day trade lose money on their tax returns. So please don't do that. Investing is not get rich quick. Investing is not an overnight thing. Investing is a journey, and you can be successsul at it, but it does take time and it does take a little bit of effort. So please don't try to do things overnight and get rich quick tomorrow.
So I'm assuming your primary asset class that you're investing in for cash flow is rental properties.
So that's one of the cash flow streams. So you can find passive income in different asset classes. So real estate is probably the most well known, but also you can find in the stock market with dividend paying stocks. Yeah. There's all sorts of stocks you can look into if you're interested in that. Dividend kings or dividend aristocrats, specific stocks that just pay dividends. A lot of companies you've probably never heard of, but that's something to go look into and do a lot of research if that's something you're interested in. Cool.
Any other pillars, if you will, of financial literacy, education, and eventually sort of working your way towards financial independence?
Yeah. So the idea of figuring out what you want to invest in. So it should be something that interests you. If you don't like stocks, if you think the stock market is crazy, then I don't advise you trying to learn how to be great as a stock investor. Likewise with real estate. If you think real estate is great or horrible, if you think it's great, maybe that's something that you want to pursue and learn more about. But the key is, if it's not something that you moderately enjoy, at least, then it's unlikely that you're going to want to continue pursuing financial education in that asset class. So pick something that's moderately interesting and then just try to learn some stuff about it. But that's if you want to try to do it yourself. Some people want to become a professional investor and they want to know all the stuff and they really like it. A lot of people don't. So there are a lot of good people out there. There are some probably not as good as well as in any industry, but there are people out there that can help you. They can manage your money for you. So there's all sorts of resources about how to rate a money manager or who to invest with, and that's a whole nother podcast just on that little tiny topic about putting your money with other people. But that's also an option. So you don't have to be a professional investor yourself. If you understand the basics and you can control your cash flow and you can set aside money for investments and for savings on a regular basis, then that is the key to long-term success.
So my last question for you, and then we'll kind of wrap up, is you mentioned Robert Kiyosaki and Rich Dad Poor Dad as being maybe a good starting place for many people to just get a good understanding of assets versus liabilities and cash flow and accumulating wealth and whatnot. But any other resources that you have found particularly useful in your journey aside from the mentors that you've had?
So I had a voracious appetite for knowledge, and when I first started this, and the internet wasn't that big of a thing yet. So books. So I have a laundry list of books that I've read that I found helpful. So in stocks, there's a guy named, again, not an endorsement, just I like the people, I like their material. A guy named Andy Tanner. He deals with stocks and generating cash flow with paper assets. Another Ken McElroy. He deals with real estate. He's written a couple really good books, ABCs of Real Estate Investing. And that's just a couple off the top of my head. But there's a list of a long list of books and different things that I've read over time to accumulate some of this knowledge and experience.
I'll throw a couple of resources out there. In the world of real estate, Bigger Pockets I found to be a very useful resource.
100%. Yeah. I don't know why that my brain didn't go there yet. I love Bigger Pockets.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, and so I've really enjoyed. They have a couple of different podcasts. Some for more experienced investors, some for more newbie investors. They also have one called the Money Show that I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to. And then also Choose FI. I don't know if you've heard of that podcast before. Choose FI. It's Choose Financial Independence, and it's a really good. They don't talk as much about real estate per se, but they focus a lot on a lot of aspects from like Mr. Money Mustache. If you've ever heard the writer before, back from like the early 2010s. Very interesting blog. It's still around. You should check it out. But so a lot of the foundational sort of principles of the FIRE movement and whatnot that they focus on. And so there's a lot of living below your means, negotiating your salaries to increase your income, right? Exploring business opportunities and stuff. So I've thoroughly enjoyed that one as well. But this is Justin. Any sort of closing comments before we sign off?
No, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate being able to share some of this with your listeners. I hope that they're able to take some of this knowledge and take some of this and use it in their life to make some changes and get further on their financial journey.
Is there a place, if any of our listeners are interested in connecting with you, do you have like a website or a service or anything you would point them towards?
So right now, actually, completely redoing all of that. So I have an email that if they want to find out about future things coming out, it's contact@withjustin.com. And so they can shoot an email there. I'll make sure they get on the list and they know about anything new coming out.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin, for your time and your expertise today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Justin.
Does it work? Awesome.
That'll work. One quick question for you, and I almost went into this on the podcast, but I felt like it probably wouldn't be relevant enough. But you were military for a while, right?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, how long were you in the military?
I did 20 years.
Oh, you did do the 20 years. So that I'm assuming played a pretty significant role in your ability to kind of reach financial independence by 39. Because I'm guessing you started at 19 in the military.
Yeah. Right at 18, but yeah.
Gotcha. Nice.
So cool. The biggest thing that gave me was the security of a steady income.
Sure.
So it gave me the ability to make mistakes with the money I'd set aside and not worry about if this all goes away, like I'm going to be destitute, right? Because I had the steady income always coming in. It was very dependable. So yeah. It removed any sort of uncertainty about like getting fired or anything like that. So that was definitely a factor that helped me be brave or take chances.
Thanks for listening. To hear more episodes, find us on social media, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.